Talk about my private member's bill, BC 287, the Housing Cost Transparency Act, which I've introduced in the House of Commons. And I want to thank my good friend, our housing critic, Scott Aitchison, for being here with me today. Canada is in a housing crisis. Young Canadians, families, renters, and first-time buyers are watching the dream of home ownership move further out of reach. As a member of Parliament for Saskatoon West, I hear regularly from people who are struggling to afford a place to live. Before entering politics, I worked as a home builder. So I also understand from practical experience how costs are added throughout the construction process. Land, labor, materials, financing, taxes, permits, inspections, delays, and regulations all affect the final price paid for a home. When governments add costs at any stage, those costs don't disappear. They're absorbed by builders and passed on to buyers and renters, or reflected in homes that simply don't get built. At a time when Canadians are struggling to afford housing, governments should not be adding hidden costs without clear public disclosure. That's why I introduced the Housing Cost Transparency Act. This bill would require the National Research Council to publish clear housing cost and impact information when proposing changes to Canada's building codes. Canadians deserve to know how a government-driven code changes may affect the price of a home. Canadians, too often, new requirements are proposed without enough clear information about what they will cost, who will pay, what kinds of housing will be affected, or how these changes could affect the ability to get homes built. My bill is about accountability, transparency, and making sure affordability is part of the conversation before further costs are imposed on homebuyers. In simple terms, I'm saying show your work. If passed, this bill would require standardized housing cost and impact summaries during public review. These summaries would explain what the proposal does, what kinds of housing are affected, the estimated costs for a typical home, who's expected to bear that cost, what benefits or drawbacks are expected, and what assumptions or uncertainties are behind the estimate. The bill would also require greater transparency about who requested, submitted, sponsored, or formally advanced a proposal. Building codes are important. This legislation does not stop governments from improving codes. Canadians deserve homes that are safe, accessible, durable, efficient, and well-built. It simply says Canadians should be told the truth about what proposed changes will cost. If a change makes a home more expensive and adds delays, increases complexity, or creates more red tape, that information should be public, accessible, and readily available during the review process. The bill also makes clear that provinces, territories, municipalities, and local authorities retain their authority over code adoption, permitting, inspections, approval, zoning, land use, and enforcement. This is about transparency in the national code process, not overriding provincial or local decision-making. Ultimately, with this legislation, we are saying to the National Research Council, when it comes to the development of building codes, show your work. I'm calling on builders, municipalities, housing stakeholders, affordability advocates, and all parties in Parliament to support this practical, common-sense legislation. Canada needs homes, not hidden bureaucracy. Conservatives will continue fighting to lower costs, remove barriers, and restore the promise that hard work should lead to an affordable home. Now, before I take any questions, I'd just like to give my colleague, our Shadow Minister for Housing, Scott Aitchison, a chance to say a few words.
Thanks, Brad. I just want to say thank you to Brad. Here's a guy with some real lived experience in building homes. He knows what he's talking about, and he recognizes some of the changes that have been made in the National Building Code and then adopted by provincial codes have added a huge amount of money to the cost of every home. This is a real practical idea to expose some sunlight on what goes on in this process. It's a convoluted process. I would contrast this really practical idea with what we've seen from Prime Minister Carney, who a year ago promised to build at speeds not seen in a generation. Meanwhile, we've spent a year debating the creation of a third federal Crown corporation on housing, given it $13 billion with no targets, no metrics, just that it's going to focus on non-market housing. Now they've added another $1.713 billion through Bill C-26 to give money to provinces for housing supply, with no metrics, no targets, no requirements for the Minister of Finance to understand anything about need or data. It's just more of the same. These are illusory. It's an illusion. That's all it is. It's more bureaucracy and it's fewer homes. Starts are dropping. The CMHC has told us this, and things are getting worse in the housing market. This is a real practical idea. I like this idea a lot, and I'm grateful to my colleague, Brad. This is what Conservatives bring. And it's really frustrating to watch Mark Carney continue to promise that he's going to do something, and it's a year in. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Scott. Are there any questions? Okay.
Sorry, I think I'm the only one here. Just a quick call. Brad, I was wondering if you have a practical example of something that you've seen in maybe in your prior life of a building code change that added a cost of just to help Canadians understand what it is that you want them to be able to see that they can't see now.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, there's lots of examples of particular changes that added cost. And the one I'll use is one that was in the 2025 code development process. And that was for air conditioners. And so the assumption was that every house is going to need an air conditioner in Canada. And so that's essentially what this process went through. And one of the things was that the information that was provided readily accessible was that it was going to cost $1 billion. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean to the average person? It doesn't mean anything. And so what this bill does is it creates a standardized way of presenting that information. So what needs to be shown is that not $1 billion, but how much per house. What are the savings per house? What are the costs per house? What are the benefits? And so that's why my bill, I think, is really important, because it actually will create a standardized process for changes to be measured against. And so then it's very easy, not just for regular Canadians, but even for those involved in the process in the National Research Council to be able to see that. And furthermore, the bill requires the council to actually sum up all of the changes so that they're always thinking about cost, but also they're thinking about the net impact of the total amount of changes, because one change here plus one change there plus one change there, they add up. And so this bill requires them to actually show the total cost impact. Really what my goal is to have the National Research Council in the development of building codes put a cost lens onto their development process.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good stuff.